Hey everybody, welcome to another episode of Back to School with Maz Jobrani. Very excited today. We have an expert on the occult, on the supernatural. Mitch Horowitz is here today with us to talk to us about Halloween. He's going to talk to us about witchcraft and Satanism. And he's going to tell us how if you're horny, you should write a book. This and much more right now on Back to School with Maz Jobrani. Maz Jobrani, hey, Jobrani Maz, oh, Maz Jobrani, hey, Jobrani, Mazzy, oh, Maz, hey, I got a podcast, oh, Back to School, yeah. All right, guys, we are here with my buddy Caitlin.
Hello, I'm so excited.
With my buddy Tehran.
This is possibly going to be one of my favorites.
You know, I got to tell you, Mitch, I met Mitch today when he arrived here. And
I thought you were going to say you met him before.
I met him before.
What?
Years ago.
You didn't tell us?
I met him here today, and I got to tell our listeners and our viewers, this man is a very smart man, very well-spoken, and it's a very interesting episode because we cover a lot of stuff. Mm-hmm. And he's written about a lot of stuff. He's written about a lot of esoteric stuff. For the Persians, esoteric means something that's like an insider, that's very, how would you describe esoteric?
I wouldn't have said esoteric.
Isn't esoteric like heady and kind of lofty ideas?
Sure.
And
Yeah,
weird,
But
weird
that's not
stuff.
what we're doing. What we're trying to do is explain it to some of the Persians and Middle Eastern people out there.
Basically, this guy writes about a lot of very important stuff, but it's very interesting stuff that is not as tangible. It's not like he's not writing about how to become a surgeon. He's not writing about
spooky stuff.
He's writing about spooky stuff that we can't quite touch, but it's there. And I tell a story in the podcast about an experience I had, which was somewhat spooky to me. And it's interesting. I think if we all look at our lives, we've all had moments where something happens that you can't logically explain it. Have you had that? Have you ever had something like that happen to you?
Oh, sure.
Talk to me about it.
My
What was it?
life's been very spooky.
Your whole life has been spooky.
I love that stuff. Well, I made a short film about my dad when I was in film school, and I decided to go to a psychic medium and talk to her and try to channel him. And it was kind of a joke, and I thought it was just going to be some like random lady that didn't know what she was doing. And then I got there, and I went with my sister, and she said she walked into the room and she goes, "God, hold on a second. This whole morning, I've just been like feeling like the need to do this like walk." And she imitated basically how my dad used to do this like silly walk. It sounds ridiculous, but it was so spot on. Like,
I believe it.
It was like she was literally like possessed by his spirit, and she was doing his exact walk. And I was like, before you even said anything to me, you're like fully channeling my dad right now, and she doesn't even know it. And she was like,
I'm telling you, there's things we can't explain.
It was crazy, and I was like, "Whoa!"
That's what this guy studies. Things we can't explain. Tehran, have you ever had that? I'm looking up esoteric
I feel that
as we speak.
Everyone has that in their lives at some point. All of us think we've had superpowers. All of us have thought we have these visions. I don't know what's real, what's not. Is that a ghost? Is it the tree in the backyard in the shadow? I used to think I had dreams that would tell the future every day. I don't know.
But I'm saying, listen, people that listen to this today, I want you, first of all, the official definition of esoteric, intended for or likely to be understood by only a small number of people with a specialized knowledge or interest. And so when you look at his biography, Mitch's biography, it says that he's a writer of esoteric subjects, and they are esoteric subjects because these are things that are understood by only a few people. And many people, myself included, are very skeptical of some of this stuff, whether it's the witchcraft or Satanism or what have you. But what we come to learn when we speak to Mitch today is that just because you put the word witchcraft or Satanism in front of it doesn't mean that these are bad people doing evil things. This is just someone who has certain beliefs, and part of those beliefs include the supernatural. That there's more to life than you and us three sitting right now. There might be other things around us. That's why on Halloween, a lot of people do feel that the haunting comes out and all that other stuff,
especially
right?
the slutty haunting. Yes,
The
everyone.
slutty haunting.
People
Slutty
feel that
haunting.
there. That's how they feel.
Listen, man, I think we should get into it with Mitch Horowitz right now and learn a little bit about this stuff because I really feel the man is very knowledgeable. He's written 3 books, or he's written multiple books, but 3 of his more popular books. One of them is called Occult America, all right? The second one, The Miracle Club, and the third one, The Power of Sex Transmutation. I mean, if that title is not one that you want to order right now on Amazon, I don't know what is. All right? So order the books. Check him out. If you have comments after the show, you can always hit us up. Ms. Kate, how do they find you?
At Y2Kate on Twitter and Y2Kate _ on Instagram.
Tehran, how do they find you?
And I am Tehran all across the board.
I am at Maz Jobrani. A few of you have been sending some messages about recent episodes. I want you to know I'm hearing you. I appreciate you. We're working on a lot of stuff, including the seating arrangement. We've changed the seating arrangement so that our guest is where my hand is on Tehran right now, and you can see him. You can see him. There we go. There. Our guest is going to be there. You can see him now, him or her. And with that said, please let your friends know. Give us some good reviews, spread the word about it, and let's go now. Let's have Mitch Horowitz on Back to School with Maz Jobrani.
Back to school, yeah.
Mitch, thank you for joining us, man.
Pleasure. That time of year.
That time of year. Historian of the occult. Now, before we go any further, I just want you to define for our audience, what is the occult? OCCULT, right?
Yes,
2
sir.
C's. What
2
is?
Cs.
Give me that definition so we can get into it from there. Go.
Well, most people consider it the supernatural. I would say it's a study of unseen forces, things that can be felt on us and through us, whether it's talking to the dead, psychical abilities, or piercing the veil to the other side.
So isn't every religion just an occult? Basically, every religion is a cult, but this is the occult.
That is what I always try to tell
occult
people.
cult.
The occult runs through every religion. When you're outside of the churchyard, when you're outside of some established congregation, that's when people call it the occult. But these practices appear in every faith.
Okay. So this is something that we all, whether you're Muslim or Jewish or Christian, Buddhist, we all have this. We feel this supernatural. There's something around us.
Unless one is an absolute materialist and just believes we're flesh and bone, and that's the end of that. In which case, they probably wouldn't find their way to me unless they wanted to argue.
And I like right out the bat your open-mindedness, which is something that you don't see. A lot of times people within a religion are not as open-minded as the people who are studying this and going, you might be this, you might be that. But you have a lot of people in certain religions who will say, you have to be this,
Absolutely.
or you will burn in hell.
Right.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And I'll tell you, I find that in my own neighborhood as well. There are people in the New Age, there are people within the occult world who would say that they are anti-dogma, anti-doctrine, but they betray those same kinds of attitudes.
Right? Mm-hmm. I like that. All right, let's get into this, because part of the thing that you also, you've studied the occult inside fiction and inside, use your own words in terms of just in culture, correct?
History, practice, culture, yes.
Okay. So in this case, leading up to this, we always have my son asks the first question to get the conversation started.
Right.
And my daughter was there too. So Dara and Mila have asked the question.
Okay.
And part of it was, I think I misrepresented you in saying that you are an expert of horror films.
Not exactly.
Not exactly.
What's behind horror films, I suppose.
What's behind horror? And I like that. So they asked questions that I think you could still answer. You don't have to be an expert in horror films to answer this. So I'm going to play their question, and we will go from here. Hold on.
right.
Okay, hold on.
Hi, Mr. Horowitz. I have a question for you. Have you ever laughed in a horror movie?
Hi, Mr. Horowitz. I also have a question for you. Have you ever cried or got very emotional in a horror movie?
Well, there you go.
Wow, those are great questions.
It's all about your feelings.
We're very feeling
They're
oriented
sensitive
today.
kids, yes.
Yeah.
If you consider Get Out to be a horror movie, which I do, I would
Yes.
say I laughed and I cried in that movie.
Yeah.
I was just talking with a friend about that movie this afternoon. It's like that scene in Spinal Tap where the band members are by Elvis's grave, and they
Yeah.
say, this puts it all into perspective. And somebody says, yes, too much perspective. That's how I
Yeah.
felt about Get Out. It was
Yeah.
too
Yeah.
much perspective.
That's how I felt about
I
Get
fell
Out.
apart.
Yeah.
I'm just saying.
I bawled.
Sorry,
I
I laughed and I cried. So the answer is yes, if you consider that a horror movie, which I do.
Yeah.
It was so real that I had a whole range of emotional responses.
Was Get Out, in your opinion, did it take horror movies to another level?
Yeah, without question.
Because I'm sorry to interrupt, but my question being partially that it had a big social commentary in it. I don't recall any other horror movies, maybe you do, that actually had some social commentaries and elaborate.
Right. I think of Jordan Peele really, truly, and I don't say this lightly, as Rod Serling for the 21st century.
Nice.
Wow.
Now, people dump on Jordan Peele sometimes on Amazon and so on. They don't like the reboot of The Twilight Zone because they feel it's too political. These very same people would have been putting down Rod Serling back in the 50s and 60s. He was just dealing with the issues of the day, whether it was McCarthyism, the Cold War, paranoia over the nuclear bomb. Jordan is dealing with all kinds of cultural issues, racism, the concept of being the other, what we do to objectify one another. And think of how boring it would be if you just had a guy like Jordan Peele, who's a genius on so many levels, who just stepped in and said, well, today we're going to critique war. We've been there. We've been there. He really took it to another level.
And let me ask you this then, in terms of, because the occult then leads to, I guess it leads to horror in many ways. What stories in our culture, since this is partially also talking about Halloween and all these spooky tales people tell, what stories do you know that were based in some sort of reality? In that you'll hear things like saying like, I used to remember as a kid, I don't know if you heard of it, but people would say like, oh yeah, Friday the 13th with Jason was based on a real guy who was in a camp who died, and then he's there to haunt people. What stories do you know specifically where you go, this actually was based on a true story, and then they took the movie and they went with it?
Sure. Well, The Exorcist and some films that deal with demonic possession are based on true stories. They take a very twisting and windy path, but you will find case studies either in the Vatican archives or in the archives of legit people who study the paranormal of demon possession. So that's one area, for example. Or, you can look at all kinds of people who were inspired by teachings that got all twisted in their minds, like, Charles Manson and so on, and that, informed a whole generation of movies. So virtually every horror movie that's out there, if it doesn't have some basis in fact, it certainly has some basis in things that people believed. For example, in this country, in New England, in Connecticut, of all places, the nice state of Connecticut, in the 1890s, there was a vampire scare. And you had local farmers and townspeople, literally, as late as the 1890s in Connecticut, a state where things are not supposed to go wrong,
right,
digging up their neighbors and driving stakes through their hearts and beheading them because they were afraid that vampires were causing a typhoid epidemic. And so you'll see a vampire movie, and I wouldn't say that's based in fact, but it's certainly based in things that people thought were
I don't know about
fact.
Connecticut, though. Isn't that where the Amityville horror house is, too?
Oh, yeah.
That's Long Island.
Oh, Long Island?
Yeah.
Oh, they're kind of the same. It's the same trek to
white people.
Body of water, white people.
Rich white
Rich
people.
white people. I just get them all confused.
Yeah.
Is Sabrina the Teenage Witch, the new one,
Yeah.
not the old one, the new one on Netflix, amazing. Is that really close to the occult?
It is in a certain sense. I mean, witchcraft is probably, you'll hear that witchcraft is one of the fastest growing religions in the world today. And that is true. I mean, we're seeing a huge revival of Wicca, witchcraft, the nature-based religions. We're seeing it among kids. And so, I can't necessarily vouch for every spell that's done on the show, but culturally, absolutely.
Going back to that for
Every
a second, this whole so the thing of witchcraft, for example. First of all, I got a couple questions. First of all, what is drawing? Because when you talked about the Exorcist, and you said that some of that stuff was based on people actually being possessed in some form.
Yeah.
As someone who thinks scientifically and logical, I'm thinking to myself, could it be that person that we thought was possessed actually had some sort of psychological issue
Absolutely.
going on, whatever it was?
Yeah.
So now let's go to witchcraft. My first question to you is: you're saying that witchcraft is thought to be one of the what was it? Witchcraft or
Fastest growing religions.
Fastest growing religion. Right?
Yeah.
So number one is what's drawing people towards it.
Yeah.
All right. And number two, are they getting together and actually going like bagalaloo, zabalaloo, put a spell, baba on you, and people are running into traffic and dying?
I
That's
wouldn't
the
play
exact
around
one,
with
yeah.
the witchcraft that
Yeah.
much, Maz, because look, it's
gonna
one
be
thing
letters.
to believe in God,
Yeah.
but I believe in gypsies, bro.
Yeah.
Like if you like anytime a gypsy offers me a flower for sale, I buy one. I'm like, yeah.
No,
I
I've
don't-
seen.
I'm
No,
not-
I've seen like
I've seen some stuff.
I've seen in some like movies or documentaries where they talk about like South America, and there's people putting spells on people, and some of that stuff is freaky.
voodoo.
The voodoo stuff. But
Sure.
so my question to you is, what are they actually doing it? Have we seen any actual results come from somebody putting a spell on someone?
Absolutely.
Talk to me about
Absolutely.
that.
Sure.
Oh.
Listen, I consider myself a believing historian. I participate in the movements that I write about. And the truth is, most people who write the history of or the sociology of religious movements usually come from the congregations that they're writing about. They don't advertise that, but most of our histories of, say, Judaism or Catholicism or Mormonism or Islam are usually written by people who come from those congregations.
Right.
So I just try to be transparent and upfront about that I'm also a participant in the occult. And I think one of the reasons witchcraft, Wicca are growing today, I mean, look, a journalist or a sociologist would say it's female positive, it's nature based, and all of that is true. But ultimately, people will not be gravitating to a movement unless they feel there's some payoff.
Right.
People feel they really get something out of it, and that they can not only sync themselves with the cycles of nature, but look, when it comes to spell work, tarot, and so on, you can meet some very straight arrow people, some very persuasive people who have had remarkable experiences.
So this is what's interesting, because I don't know if I've mentioned this, but I read the book, The Celestine Prophecies. Remember that book?
I know the author very well.
So
James
years
Redfield,
ago,
worked with him, yeah.
I read this book, and it was a really interesting book. And the
Good
book,
book.
the book itself talks about how there's many different levels of us of consciousness, right? So you and I are talking right now. I'm aware of what's going on. Then there's another level. Then there's another, and the deeper you get, the more in touch you are with what's going on. So there have been times in my life where, for example, I'm reading a book, and some very rare word is I'm reading a word like, let's say, serendipitous or something.
Yeah.
And somebody behind me says that word, and I go, what? And it just, I don't know
What
what
are
it
the
means.
chances?
What
Because
are the
that's not
chances?
an average everyday word.
What are the chances, right? Or I'll give. Oh, this is a good one. Talk about spooky. Okay, you guys want spooky? Here's a
Yes.
spooky
Yes,
story.
we're ready.
So this happened. So the TV show, what's it? AO, I think it's called.
Yes.
Right. AO on
OA.
Netflix. The OA. The
Oh,
OA.
OA.
Which when in looking it up,
Good
you know
show.
what the OA is?
Yeah, yeah.
I looked it up, and it was saying that they weren't sure if it stood for the original angel or what. Anyway, so, and I know the creator of it. He's one of the Batman Galij kids, Zal, I believe is his name. Anyway, run into this guy. He tells me he started a show. Oh, great. Let me check it out. I check it out, right? So I'm checking it out, and this is when my daughter was maybe 5 or 6. Okay, all right. I'm sitting there in the master bedroom. My wife and I were watching it together. And as we're watching this, so for people that haven't seen the show, OA is this show about this girl who comes to this town, and she's got superpowers. We don't know what it is. Would that be occult? Would that be the supernatural?
Absolutely.
The occult, right? So she's doing stuff people don't know. What is she? Is she an angel? Is she a devil? Nobody knows what it is. And this is modern day, happening modern day. And so as the episode is ending, my daughter walks in the room. Now, my daughter had never done this before. She walked into the room.
She levitated
She
in.
levitated in the room.
She levitated
Yeah,
in.
yeah.
She'd never done this
No.
before.
She walked into the room, and she goes like this. She goes, Daddy, I got a bloody nose. And I go, oh, baby, let me see. And she came over, and she had a bloody nose. I don't know if it was because she picked it or what happened, whatever. I help her with her nose. I go, baby, give her a kiss, go back to sleep. She goes back to sleep. I'm not making this up. I hit play again, and now the show is towards the end of the pilot episode, and the girl starts telling her story of who she is. She's sitting around with everyone in town who's agreed to listen to her. And she goes, I am this girl from Russia. In 1906, I was in Russia, and it shows her in Russia as a little baby girl, and she's there with her father, and her father's eating dinner, and this cute little baby girl walks into dinner and goes, Daddy, and her nose is bleeding. Her nose is bleeding, and the father comforts her and puts her to sleep. And I go, wait a minute. I go, this is crazy. I go,
That
what?
is crazy.
I go,
That's
what? I'm getting
crazy.
chills right now.
Wow.
Yeah.
So talk to me.
Yeah.
Do
yeah.
I have?
Explain
what's
exactly
going on?
what happened there.
You know, a lot of people who would profess not to believe in the occult or in anything supernatural in private will tell you stories about having precognitive dreams, about having these extraordinary synchronicities between something going on in some other part of their life, something that happens to a family member, something where they're thinking of something that seems extremely unlikely, and suddenly it fits the mold of an event that's playing out in their lives. I would say that most people, including those who would profess no belief in the paranormal, could share with you a spine-tingling story about just some extraordinary congruity between thought and event. And that convinces us that reality is not exactly what we think it is. We're not just flesh and bone. We're connected to one another in ways that we don't fully understand.
That's a lesson
There's
for the
some,
show.
like-
Write
That's
that
a
down.
lesson for the show. Reality is not what we think it is. We're not just flesh and bone, right? There's some connectivity. Is that what you just said?
Some
Did I miss it?
connectivity.
like
Okay.
a collective kind
Right.
of consciousness.
And I'll tell you what was scary about the story you told us, Maz.
Yeah.
Number one, that Bat Mongolese kid who you're good friends with did not put either one of us in that show.
Yeah, that's some
Terrifying.
That's
bullshit
actually,
right there.
it's scary. And number two, that you, of all people, were watching the OA. I'm very...
It's a
Yeah,
good
that is
show.
surprising.
I'm sure
I
it's a
haven't seen
great
it.
show.
So
And
here-
why weren't you watching The Game Changer? So the kid walks in and goes, Daddy, I just made $1 billion or something. Something?
Yeah,
no,
there you
because
go.
this is what I want. This is what I want to know. Because again, this is Halloween. Now we're talking about Halloween, and obviously a lot of people, when you talk about the occult, you talk about witches, you talk about vampires. People get scared, right?
Yeah.
So what are some stories you've heard where someone has taken? Because what you're telling me right now, what I just described to you was. When that happened with my daughter and all that stuff, it made me go, what is this? I don't know what it is. But it was actually also a beautiful thing in my opinion, because it was a connectivity between my daughter and I somehow in this spiritual world. Now talk to us about instances where it's gone the other way, where you go, like you said, the Charles Manson type stuff, where someone's taken that and been like, we're carving people. What do we got?
What's the
Well-
scariest story you've got, bro?
I will share something scary that happened to me. Several years ago, I was writing an article on Ouija boards, and I started thinking to myself, this goes way back. This probably goes back to 2006. And I started walking around thinking to myself, if I'm going to write this article on Ouija boards, I should probably start experimenting with the Ouija board myself. I should get some skin in the game. And I didn't talk to anybody about this. I didn't
Scary.
tell anybody. I didn't mention it to anybody. It was just something I happened to be walking around thinking about. Out of the blue, I received this email from a complete stranger who says to me, listen, I don't know you, but I get the impression that you're thinking about using the Ouija board, and I want to warn you against it. And he tells me this very frightening story of how his wife had received some sort of a Ouija board. It was called an angel board to write a review of for some magazine. And she started getting these threatening phone calls at work, and the police put a tap on her phone at work, and they discovered that the phone calls were coming from their own son back at the house, who had been experimenting with this so-called angel board and was speaking in this very frightening, deep voice over the phone to mom and threatening her. And if that wasn't creepy enough, this guy who reached out to me, and I had spoken to no one about my interest in Ouija, said, I want to warn you off it. He and I got into a little dialogue over email. And he started getting weirder and weirder and more judgmental. And I said, you know what? I got to put an end to this right now. And I thought, how different really is the Ouija board from, say, social media? We're putting a message out there. We don't know who's getting it, who's coming back over. Sure, there's a picture of them, but we don't know who they really are, what they know about us. And I thought to myself, this whole social media thing is like one big Ouija board in a way.
Absolutely.
Wow.
No, you're right. You don't know who's who. So the guy disappeared at that point? He left you alone?
I sort of froze the conversation, and he left me alone. But it always struck me, how did this guy come to the opinion that I was walking around thinking about experimenting with the Ouija board? I hadn't talked to anybody
wild.
about
See,
it.
my thought on all this is that whether it's witchcraft or let's go back to religions that are accepted, it feels like there's, all these things are out there as things for people to use, to learn about, what have you, but there's a lot of demented minds who will then go and take that and spin it to fit what they want to do. So the guy who goes and blows himself up in the name of Islam, or the guy who goes shoots people up in the name of Christianity, or whatever it is. Yeah. So it seems a similar thing with witchcraft. Like witchcraft could actually be just like you said, it's
yeah, but I've never heard of a real, like, we make up these stories where witchcraft people have done something crazy, but it's always us doing something to them and not the other way around.
Well, that's like the whole Satanic Panic thing. Like that wasn't really. It was kind of baseless. And Satanists are like lovely people. Turns out, like they're fine.
That's not even what they don't believe what we think they believe.
Was is that the Scarlet Letter stuff we're talking about? What are you talking about?
Oh no, Satanic Panic. I don't.
When was that?
Exactly
when was this?
When it was, but it was kind of when probably I imagine following the uptick in serial killers and like
it was in the
60s and 70s.
Well, we have a historian
and the 80s, and then it was everyone started blaming everything on Satanists.
You're absolutely right, and
Satanism.
you're right on. There was this Satanic Panic that swept the country, 1980s, early 1990s, and people were claiming that daycare workers and teachers and social workers and other people were committing ritual abuse against people, and there were these secretive satanic cells around the country. It was complete nonsense. There wasn't a thread of truth to it, and a lot of people's lives got ruined because when you make an accusation like that, people rush in to believe it. It's like somebody throwing a stone in a mob situation, and suddenly everybody else starts throwing a stone. When you get into that mob mentality, not only does truth get buried right away, but unfortunately, people enjoy it. We like throwing stones at one another. So when you make an accusation like that, suddenly everybody's problems go out the window and they're ready to point fingers. And the Satanic Panic was a complete farce, and it ruined the lives of a lot of innocent people.
So when you write about the occult, you said that you participate sometimes. So have you participated in witchcraft? Have you participated?
Oh, yeah.
And give us an example of what you did. You showed up at someone's house and they go, "Hey, we're doing witchcraft." What is that?
Well, for example, I will read tarot cards for people.
Okay.
I do a very simple 3-card tarot spread. I mean, it's funny, like for a while I was charging nominal fees for it, but I decided to no longer do that because I just didn't feel right about that exchange. So now I'll only do it either on a friend-to-friend level, or if I'm doing it to support a school or some sort of an event, I'll do it that way. It just felt cleaner and more right to me. But I've had experiences where I've done tarot card readings for people, and we've both been blown away by the accuracy. I'm not going to say that's every case,
right?
But there have been some extraordinary hits. So that's just one small aspect.
So you do it with 3 cards?
3 cards.
Do you have them here?
I have them in my backpack.
Oh, I want to try this.
Let me grab the backpack and we'll go. Well,
can we?
Oh my God! Do you coffee read too?
I want a reading.
I feel like we could do a whole thing. I don't want to read.
Are we going to do Caitlin? We're going to do Caitlin?
I would love to have a reading.
All right, we're going to do a reading.
Is that okay?
By all means.
Because I've had like.
I didn't come all this way to be shy.
I mean, have you ever had a reading? Because we're in LA.
I have not. It's so funny you bring this up because again, with my kids, recently something came up with my kids about like fortune tellers, right? And it's funny. Again, I'm skeptical of it. And my daughter, who is 8 years old, but she's really street smart.
Yeah.
She said something along the lines of like, I think fortune tellers take a look at you and then they kind of base it off of your look.
Well, that's like sometimes, yeah.
Well, I remembered when I was in high school, our senior class party, we had a guy who was a fortune teller, and it was kind of funny because I had this T-shirt back then. Back then there was the free. I think it was free Nelson Mandela or it was free James Brown. It was free James Brown. They'd taken the Nelson Mandela T-shirt and turned it free James Brown because he was in jail at the time. So I'm sitting there, and this guy's telling my fortune, and he's like, You're an activist. You're trying to make a difference, and I was like, and I looked down. I'm like, because I got the shirt on, man. But this is going to be.
I feel like a lot of people sit and say kind of like, well, they know how to read you, and it's a scam, and blah blah blah. And some people do that for sure, and I've thought about that before, and then I've seen psychic mediums, or I've had tarot readings done where I'm like, oh my God. I will say this. How do people know this?
Well, no, I would say this about Mitch right now is that I appreciate the fact that you're a historian. I've read some of your writings and you're a good writer. And so that makes me then at least
You're like, this guy's legit.
No, it's not like I'm not driving down the street and there's some lady sitting there with a little ball going like, come in. This dude,
don't do that.
Yeah.
What you guys are referencing is a cold reading. And people who engage in cold readings, there are varying levels of talent, but some of them can just be extraordinary. Now, I will say this, Caitlin, if I'm going to do this reading for you, be tough on me. Be tough on me. You can ask me something very specific.
Okay.
I'll put my reputation on the line.
Okay.
Here.
All
We'll
right.
see what I'm about.
Okay.
I mean,
You're going down.
Ladies and gentlemen,
I'm ready.
the truth
I'm
is
so ready.
the truth about Caitlin is being revealed
I'm a
today.
believer.
A lot of people
So-
do believe in tarot. I mean, I do know that,
I
for
do.
example, in the Persian culture, reading coffee, especially in the Middle East, very popular.
Oh, yeah.
And a lot of religion is steeped in these mystical thoughts. Even in Judaism, of course, there's Kabbalah, but very much being Persian, I realize a lot of traditions that we have are actually mystical traditions and not religious.
Right.
If you think of everything that has to do with the Persian New Year and zodiac, our months align exactly with the zodiac, the concept of the lunar calendar, the jumping over fire before the Persian New Year, what we put on the table. All these things are basically just mystical conceptions.
Absolutely.
That are
And
normalized.
I think you're right. And I think first of all, you were talking about the Persian New Year is also entrenched with Zoroastrianism, which was the first monotheistic religion. And they do things where a lot of it is getting rid of the bad luck of last year, jumping over fire, and you bring in the good luck of this year. There's a lot of luck and all that stuff. And I think beyond that, as someone who's skeptical in general of the fortune telling and all that stuff, I know, like you said, definitely the women in my family and others within my family are believers, and if nothing else, I think it helps them kind of
clarify.
It's like going to a therapist, right?
Sure.
Here's my problem.
Yeah.
Help me figure it out.
Right.
And so I think it does help clarify whether you believe or not.
Yeah, the querent and the tarot reader or the psychic or the channeler can have a therapeutic relationship with the client. The reason I stopped charging for my tarot readings, except when I'm doing it for an organization, is that I do think that something can be real without necessarily being repeatable. And I think there can be an extraordinary rapport between a reader and a subject, but it's not necessarily something you can turn off and on like a water faucet. And so when people go to see a channeler, for example, or when they go to see a psychic, they can get into a situation where they might get an extraordinary and authentic hit. There's a real rapport between the two individuals. And the next time you go, nothing will happen. And people expect these experiences to repeat, but the occult likes to hide. It's not simple. It's not dentistry. It doesn't really work that way. So it's authentic, but it can be elusive. But that said, I'm still prepared to
Let's try this.
go.
Let's
Let's
happen.
go.
Ready.
Let's
Give
try
it a
this. Are you
try.
ready? How does this
Okay.
work?
All I'm going to say is you can ask me any question you want in this wonderfully private setting where,
Okay.
there's only thousands of people
Sure,
watching and your
sure.
mom and so forth.
No, my mom doesn't listen.
Oh,
That's
okay. Your
right.
mom
We're
doesn't
fine.
listen. So
We're good.
We need
ask
listeners,
about her.
Caitlin. Tell your mom to
I
listen.
told her.
Right. Any question you want. I mean,
Okay.
look, you can ask for a general weather report, just kind of where are things at in my life, or you can ask something very specific. What I will do is I'll shuffle the cards. I'll do a very simple 3-card reading. I look for
Okay.
a storyline within the reading. I'm sorry we don't have like a tarot cam from the ceiling, but
Oh,
maybe
yeah.
next Halloween.
Okay.
And we'll see what we get.
We didn't set up our tarot cam in
All right.
time.
Let's try this.
Okay, so a question about.
Anything whatsoever.
Okay. I guess I like the weather report idea. Sort of
What's going on?
what's going on,
Come
what's
on,
in
be
store. No,
braver
it
than
feels
that.
well. I don't really have.
You were so excited. I thought
No,
you had
I
a
am
real
excited.
question.
Well, I've never done
What
this
does your
this
future
3-card
hold?
reading. I've only ever done the long one with
What
like
is
7
something
cards.
in your life right now that you're
Yes.
thinking about, like whether it's career or
Yeah.
it's relationships or it's
Okay.
something yourself? What's something big like that in your life that you're curious about?
Okay, I guess I need guidance on my career path and sort of what I feel like I am, like every other person, like stuck in a day job, and I feel like there's many paths that diverge, and I don't know which one to go down.
Okay,
so what,
bravo. That's
yeah.
great.
Okay.
And I will say that when people come to me with questions, I would say 90% of the questions are romance and career. And nobody should ever be embarrassed about that. That's a huge
Yeah.
part of our lives. Romance and career.
Yeah.
That's what
Yeah.
most of us care about. And I'm the same way. Okay,
Yeah.
so I'm going to do a spread.
Okay.
You talk amongst yourselves. or
Sure.
whatever you
Okay.
like,
Well,
you know.
Not even career so much as like vocation.
Gotcha.
You know.
Yeah.
Life purpose.
Yeah, the purpose. Yeah,
purpose of my
which,
life.
by the way, this is back to school. This is
Yeah.
learning while you do this. I'll explain something here, which is why not have somebody like we were saying,
Yeah.
a tarot reader or a fortune teller or somebody help guide you in finding that. If you're,
absolutely.
because we go to our therapist, we talk to our friends. I think one of the hardest things people have in life is finding their passion. That's a very hard thing to do.
Yeah.
And I personally say that I knew this at a young age that I wanted to be a comedian. And I know that the day I decided to do this, because I had to fight my parents to be able to do this.
Yeah.
And when I was 26 and I finally decided to do this, it's been icing on the cake since. So if you have somebody like Mitch over
Yeah.
here who can help figure you and guide you, why not?
Just to let
Yeah.
everyone know what Mitch did,
Okay.
especially to our iTunes users. So Mitch spread out the cards,
Yeah.
and then at random, after shuffling them for an extensive period of time, at random chose and selected 3 cards after hearing your question.
To flip.
without
So he is
seeing,
the medium.
Yeah.
he
without
saw,
seeing them.
without seeing what they were.
3
Okay.
random
Right.
cards.
So here we go.
So here we go. I'm interpreting this reading basically from, we have 3 cards. I'm interpreting it from left to right. The first card in the reading is the card of strength, which is you in the present. This is a woman seeking to gently restrain a lion. She's not in a frenetic or violent state, but she is wrestling with a beast. And in this case, I would say the beast is the question of vocation and professionalism that you're facing. The good news is, in the immediate future, you have the 3 of Cups, which is actually very pertinent to this season. You can see a little pumpkin there on the
It's fall.
yeah,
It's
the
fall,
lower
baby.
foreground of the card. There's a kind of harvest festival going on. You have something very, very good that's coming very, very soon. And I want you to hold me to that. You know, if I'm
okay.
wrong and tell,
I'll be
tell
pissed.
me. Yeah,
Yeah.
you'll be pissed.
This podcast is about
I
to
am-
take off. You're
right.
getting encouraged.
Hell yeah.
And finally,
That wasn't for us, Maz. It was just Caitlin.
yeah.
Caitlin's going to
Right,
get her
right.
own podcast.
She's
Spin-off
doing very well,
podcast.
gentlemen. She's doing great.
Y2 Kate.
And then the
Yeah.
third and final card is the High Priestess, which is a feminine card of absolute power in which you are able to balance extremes. So whatever is going on in different parts of your vocation is going to come into absolute balance probably in the very near future. This figure is sitting between 2 poles. One is marked B, the other is marked J. That's for the Hebrew Boaz, which means negative, and J, Joaquin, which means affirming, positive. You are the high priestess in the center. You're able to balance between these extremes and needs in your life. It's a very propitious reading, and it should spell something very positive happening for real in the
Okay.
immediate future. So in 1 week, tell me what happens.
I will.
Let's
I
see if
love
I'm
that.
Call
legit.
Mitch and be
I
like,
love
hey,
that.
Mitch, hey.
No, I
It's
love
Tehran
that.
from the show.
Well-
Kate got hit by a car. It's like,
That's
no.
terrible.
Okay,
She
thanks,
quit.
guys.
Just-
She
Thank you.
quit.
Well, I have a question about the astrology and tarot.
Please.
And because I used to read the birthday book. Is that
Sure.
legit? In
Actually,
any way?
that happens to be assembled by 2 very, very good astrologers.
Okay.
And although it's a coffee table book and it's sold millions of
Yeah.
copies and it's kind of a novelty, it's a
resonates.
very good book.
It really
is.
resonates.
Yeah.
What's the birthday book?
So the birthday book is, correct me if I'm wrong, it compiles, I think, astrology, tarot, and numerology to kind of give you this really comprehensive view of yourself based on the day that you were born. And I was, when I was 18, I got my day. There's an illustrator that does really cute illustrations of every day, and I got my illustration tattooed on me because it like resonated
really?
so deeply with me. Yes, I'm the day of high voltage. But you can look up your day.
Is it based on year or just day?
Just day, and then they do a year thing too. I think they do some specification based on the year, but they give you based on just the month and day, like a title for
Yeah.
your day. So I'm the day of high voltage, and then they give you a tarot card that's assigned to you based on, I think it's the number of your birthday, and if there's 2 numbers, they add them together. So mine's 7, and my tarot card was the Tower,
Oh,
which I hear is the scariest
kinda
card
heavy.
in the deck.
I must admit it's heavy.
Scarier
yes.
than death. And so I would
Well, I
always
don't know
read
that I'd
that
go
and be
that
like,
far, but-
what's going on? Well, the death, they say that the death card is less scary.
What is
Well,
a death card? That means
I
you're
don't
going to die?
No, that because the death card represents like new beginnings, kind of in a way, and the Tower is just like destruction. I read that and I was like, okay.
It's rather unsettling. I will
Okay.
say that book, the birthday book, it's a novelty book, but the 2 guys who wrote that are very good astrologers, and a lot of people have good experiences with that book.
Yeah. Okay.
So we're going to check with you to see if good things happen.
Okay.
The only problem is that we put these podcasts out of order, so you
True.
might hear it.
See,
In
a
7
few-
months.
I'm protected. Good, right.
There you
Mitch,
go.
You guys keep doing that. Mix it
Yeah.
up.
You've
Totally.
written 10 books?
About 10 books,
About
yes.
10 books. And one of them was about the transmutation of sex.
Yes, The Power of Sex Transmutation.
Yeah,
What is
That's
that?
a very recent
Yeah,
book.
let's talk about
I
that.
love
What is
that.
that?
Yeah.
What's the name of the book so our listeners can look
The
it up?
Power of Sex Transmutation.
Okay, that's the name of the book. Okay.
Yeah.
But it's scientific. It's,
Okay.
It's strictly scientific.
What is the
Well,
power of sex mutation?
It's very simple, and it's something people can experiment with. Now, dig this. There are a lot of esoteric teachings, including within some of the mainstream faiths, like Judaism, Buddhism, that hold that sexuality and the sexual urge is the life force itself, the creative force itself seeking expression. Most of the time, we vent that expression either through physical pleasure or through propagation of the species. If it weren't for the sexual urge, we would not be here. But there is an esoteric teaching, and I encourage people to experiment with it, that when you are feeling a sense of sexual desire at a time and place of your own choosing, you can elect to, through a mental act, shift away from thoughts of physical satisfaction toward thoughts of some project that you're trying to accomplish, whether it be a job interview, whether it be something creative, financial, you name it. And you will be enlisting those same creative forces, so to speak, at the back of whatever it is you're working on. Our view of sexuality is too limited. We think of sexuality as either physical pleasure or propagation. But at times and places of your own choosing, when you're feeling the sexual urge, through a mental act, you can redirect it towards some task, whatever it may be, that you want to accomplish. You will increase your creativity, your mental acumen, your enthusiasm.
So you're saying when I'm feeling horny,
Yes,
I should go sit at the keyboard,
Boom.
but don't write in porn.
correct.
Open up a blank document
Right.
and
Don't
just
write
start
in
writing
porn.
your book.
Writing
Exactly.
your own
That's
porn.
been
That's a beautiful lesson.
That's-
Being hornitos can make you productive.
But
Yes.
that's the
Boom.
That's your subtitle.
right there though is that this is the biggest scam of the modern age, which is the computer was supposed to be something that helps us be productive, and they put the internet on there
Yeah.
with porn. You know how many people have stepped up to go, I'm going to
Yeah.
write this book,
Yes, I
and
do.
then gotten distracted.
Yes, I do.
And then the
Yeah.
creativity's
He
gone.
partakes
then it's
himself
gone.
in everything he does. He's a believing historian.
Yeah.
Maz. He studied a lot about this and the transmutation. That's how he
I love
wrote
this.
the
So the
book.
lesson is when you're horny,
When you're horny.
Write a book.
open up a
Write a
blank,
book.
write a book.
Right.
Right.
It actually can be boiled
That's
down that
literally it.
simply. Yes.
When you're
Boom.
horny, write a book.
And dig this. It doesn't mean abstinence. It doesn't mean changing your sexual life. You don't have to tell your boyfriend or girlfriend or spouse that you're doing it. You don't have to tell your shrink. It's just a personal experiment to try. And I'm not really into group or congregational spirituality. I like experiments that people can just try on their own. They're private. They don't have to tell anybody. They don't have to hang a label on themselves. Just something to try. So that's what the book is about.
I want to go
that.
back to the Halloween stuff for a minute before we move on. So two things. First of all, your favorite horror movie of all time. Is it Get Out or
whoa.
what would it be?
My favorite horror movie of all time is Rosemary's Baby, which I absolutely love. I watch it again and again.
Okay,
Yeah.
that's a good answer. Second question I have, The Shining.
Yeah.
Wasn't there a real guy? Was that based on a real guy who lost his mind, or is that all?
Not really, no.
No.
You know, I will say that I think that the vision that Kubrick brought to The Shining in the movie is like just amazing, you know, compared to what was in the book. The novel's a good novel.
Yeah.
And I've enjoyed it, but what Kubrick brought to that movie was, I mean, it was just
They do
stellar.
Wasn't
that
it
a lot,
based
though.
on-
They do that a lot, where they make you feel like it's real, like the Texas Chainsaw Massacre. I didn't realize until very recently that was not real.
Oh, it's not based on
anything.
true events?
No, and
Oh, I
they show
didn't
the
know that.
clip at the end, and it looks so
Yeah.
real, and it's not. But I remember when Blair Witch came out, because I lived in D.C. at the time,
Right.
and they were just
That
kids
shit
at
seemed
it.
real.
They were just kids who did this movie, and they kept pushing it. And then Blair Witch got in trouble for making it seem real.
Right.
And so that's
Yeah.
when they started putting the
Well, the
disclaimer.
reason
Yeah.
the reason that Shining felt believable was because he loses his mind as it goes. So
Yeah.
somebody had said, because you go, oh, I could see somebody losing their mind like this, right? So now going back to that again, so we had the story of, you were talking about Manson, and Manson was someone who took the occult or whatever it was and turned it way evil. in modern day, have we found different a group somewhere in the world that did something similar to that?
Now, dig this. I would say people are always asking me, can't this stuff feed into evil? Can't this stuff encourage people to do horrible things? Is there some horrible group somewhere messing with us? And I always tell people, there is evil in our world, but if you want to find it, it's in some gray cubicle somewhere where a health insurance company is denying your claim
That's
for
fair.
coverage
Real.
that you've paid
That's
for.
fair.
That's infinitely more evil than anything people
Well,
like me are
also,
involved
knowledge.
in.
like mainstream
Knowledge.
religions do that too. So it's, you know.
Yeah, it's basically whatever the person is, they'll find that
Right.
within whatever
They'll find the
they'll justify it.
justification.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
What got you into the occult, especially being a good Jewish
Good
boy
Jewish boy.
from
I know.
Queens?
This wasn't supposed to happen. Right. Well, I did grow up I had an Orthodox bar mitzvah in Queens back in the day.
Wow.
Grew up in a traditional Jewish household. But as a kid, I was always interested in folklore, magic, superstition, myth, and I would take books of folklore out from our local public library. And one day I took out a book of Pennsylvania Dutch folklore when I was 9 years old. And it had this little pentagram-like chart in it with different prophecies on it. And you were supposed to use this to tell your own fortune. Close your eyes, hover a pin above the pentagram, bring it down, and that would be your fortune. So I brought it down on what said a letter. A letter would arrive. And I was only 9 years old, so very few letters were coming to me, you know. And the very next day, it's totally true, a letter did arrive at the house, and it was from the public library. It was an overdue book notice. So I thought,
Your
this
book
is
is
just too
overdue.
good. This is just too symmetrical.
Oh, wow.
And I suppose that ignited my imagination, but I always wanted to know where this stuff came from. I was always interested in Bigfoot, flying saucers, astrology, folklore, and I wanted to peel back the onion, and I got to do that as I grew up.
So when did the interest in things like the occult, and I see you have the Neville Goddard
Yeah,
tattoo
he's
on
my
you,
man.
and this
Yeah.
is like the biggest mystic of all time,
Yeah.
besides Abdullah, the guy who got him into it, right?
Oh,
Tell
you
us
know what
tell
you're
us about
doing.
Neville Goddard. I don't know about
You
Neville
know
Goddard.
what you're doing.
Tell us about Neville Goddard.
Neville Goddard was a British Barbadian mystic who lived and worked most of his life in America. He died in 1972. He had
Allegedly.
he had a mysterious teacher,
In October.
black Jewish turban man named Abdullah, with whom he studied in the 1930s. And Neville had one basic teaching, which is that your imagination is God, and that everything you experience, every relationship you have, everything that goes on in your world is the product of your own emotionalized thoughts and mental pictures pushed out into the world. And it's the most radical thesis, and people immediately want to argue with it and say, wait a minute, there's all kinds of things happening in my life that I didn't wish for. And Neville would say, look again. If you peel back the onion of your thoughts, you'll find this incredible congruity between thought and experience, thought and actual concrete experience. And Neville had this amazing capacity to restate this one basic idea over and over in thousands of lectures, dozens of books. And every time he did so, it sounded fresh and convincing and persuasive. And I have a tattoo of him on my left arm, and he's been the greatest
It's like The
influence in my
Secret,
life.
except with a little more pizzazz, right?
So your
Right.
imagination is God.
That was his case.
Because I know, like when I used to play baseball and as a kid, a lot of times the coach would say,
This is so great.
imagine yourself hitting that ball, hitting
Yeah.
the base hit.
Yeah.
See yourself hitting the base hit, and it was a lot of this C.
Yeah.
And sometimes it did help.
Right.
Now you're saying sometimes somebody might sit there and go, well, I've applied everywhere for work. I can't find work. Your imagination is God, meaning something in your brain
looking.
is bringing you to this place where you're not finding the job. Like something your fear of success or something's going on underneath it. Is that what you're saying?
Yes, and Neville would say that it's not only just the power of suggestion. It's not only that there's some psychological connection between what you think and what happens to you, but he would say if you read Scripture, Old Testament, New Testament, every time you come upon a reference to Christ or Yahweh or God, that is actually a symbolical reference to your own imagination, and that the story being told in Scripture is not historical, but is the blueprint of your own psychical unfolding, and that if you can realize this, you'll start to get in touch with
You want to know
who you
something
really
very
are.
interesting about
Yeah.
that?
This is very
So-
much like therapy.
It is.
Go
I mean, so in Farsi, what's the word for God?
Khoda.
Exactly. What's the root word?
Oh, khod, you.
Which means yourself. So
Yeah.
God is within yourself, which is why in Persian tradition, when you refer to God, you know how we have a proper way to refer to you, and then a very common way,
Shema,
a familiar way.
right.
Exactly. You refer to God as To and not Shema because it's the most familiar, close thing to you because it is yourself.
Whoa.
Look at that.
May I just say in tribute to
Yeah.
you all that
Damn.
most podcasts I do, the hosts do not gauge in discussions of
Oh.
what's the term for God in Farsi
Yeah,
and Persian
yeah,
theology.
we're
So
learning.
Thank you.
There
This is
you
quite
go.
an unusual podcast.
Persian. Wait till we get
I
into
like it
some.
here.
I have
Yeah.
another thing I
Arabic.
read that you wrote because you've written on a lot of subjects,
Yeah.
right? It
Yeah.
said esoteric subjects and so one of the things you wrote is Emile Coup, the day by day in every way I'm getting better and better.
Yes.
Talk to us about that because I've heard of this before.
Yeah, yeah.
And I've heard of it actually working. So tell us about
Sure.
this.
Emile Coué was a French mind theorist who lived and worked in the early 20th century. He was very popular for a period of time, but people made fun of him because he had one basic idea, which is that you should repeat the mantra to yourself day by day in every way, I'm getting better and better. And people would say, how could anything so simple and so childish really make a difference in people's lives? What they misunderstood was his prescription for how to use it. He had an instinct for something that sleep researchers today call the state of hypnagogia. We all enter this state of hypnagogia twice a day, just as we're falling to sleep at night, just as we're coming to in the morning. It's an enormously suggestible period of time, and you can use this period of time for a kind of self-hypnosis. That's when Coué said you should use this mantra day by day in every way, I'm getting better and better. It's very simple, and if you can use it in that drowsy state, just as you're falling to sleep and just as you're coming to, you can effectively recondition your mind.
You're
That was his
hypnotizing
contention.
yourself?
Yeah.
Exactly. Self-hypnosis.
And have you heard of, because
I do
somebody
that.
told me about this, and I think it was Tom Dreesen, I think, was telling me that he's actually heard of people in the hospital using this and getting better. Now, I don't personally know specific people that this happened to. Have you heard of specific stories of somebody who
that
somehow
working?
got better, and or maybe it wasn't physical, maybe it was a mental thing? What have you heard about that?
I've heard a lot of stories, but I will tell you this. A few years ago, Harvard Medical School did a placebo study to determine whether a drug, an active drug, would be more effective if you gave a patient positive information about the drug, accurate positive information about the drug. And this team of Harvard researchers found that this was correct, that patients reported better effects of a drug if they got positive, accurate information. Coué had that exact same insight in the early 20th century, and I contacted the researchers at Harvard to ask whether they were thinking about his work when they structured the study. And a man named Ted Kapchick, who's the head of the Harvard program in placebo studies, said to me, you know what, we were not, but I am familiar with Coué, and I think what we found in his work would comport. So the man was just tremendously ahead of his time, even though his name is not very often
I mean, we
heard.
know hysteria is real. So if we're in an enclosed space and one of us gets sick and we describe that to everyone, they will also exhibit symptoms, even if they're not actually sick, because they believe they are sick.
Right.
They will
to me.
have bumps. They will throw up. And technically, there is nothing wrong with them except for the suggestive idea that we are all now sick. So why not the positive effect?
Yeah, the
Yes,
power of the
exactly.
brain, basically.
Right.
We see it happen
Yeah.
in the negative all the time. It's the power of suggestion. It's
Right.
enormously powerful. I mean, what's going on? But I would say it even goes beyond suggestion. I mean, we're seeing things in like the field of neuroplasticity, for example, that clinicians can demonstrate that thoughts that you repeatedly hold will eventually change the chemistry in your brain. It'll change the neural pathways through which electrical impulses travel in your brain. It's literally mind over matter. It's happening on a cellular level, and it puts us in front of incredible questions and implications.
Does that happen politically too? The world we're living in right now,
Yeah.
with the constant negative tweets or what have you. And
Yes.
let's go from both sides.
Yeah.
Is it happening where people's chemical, the brain is being so, because I've experienced as a stand-up
Yes.
comedian,
I
when
agree.
I've done my Trump jokes, you've seen it, I've had people like lose their minds.
Oh, absolutely.
And I'm going, are we in the
Absolutely.
same America? Because I
Right.
thought we're supposed to make fun of our leaders And
You have a gift.
and I have a gift. I do have a gift.
He
The
somehow
5 degrees of
finds-
separation of Donald Trump.
he
I always get
somehow
trumpet.
finds a way.
I didn't say Trump. You guys said Trump. But listen,
He did not. I know that.
Yeah.
Well,
I
you
said
threw
it.
it. You
Yeah.
said about the
It's
jokes.
almost like an improv game. It's
It
like,
is,
here's
right?
a topic, relate
Yeah.
it back to.
but is that happening? You think that our brains are being rewired through what's going on politically?
Absolutely. I think
Yeah.
anger is addictive. I think sarcasm, bitter sarcasm is addictive. There's nothing wrong with sarcasm when it's funny, but this kind of bitter sarcasm. And I've had the same experience. I've had people in my life who I've done favors for, who I've helped out in difficult situations, and maybe I make one errant remark on social media about Trump, something mild, and they go ballistic on me. And I'm like, are you for real?
Yeah.
You know, I just helped you out of a jam last week. I make one comment, and
Yeah.
now, like, we're enemies. I think it's addictive. Yeah.
Let me ask you this: speaking of politics, you were censored in China.
For
what
real.
was that about?
For real. I wrote a book called One Simple Idea, which was a history of the positive thinking movement. Emile Coué, Neville Goddard, some of these other figures we've been discussing. And so a publishing company in Shanghai bought the translation rights to the book. Everything's sailing along just beautifully. I'm working with the translator. Everything's great. And right on the eve of publication, she tells me, guess what? Government censors came in, looked at the book. They're cutting about 30% of it. 30% of it. Because the Chinese government and its policies of censorship.
Hold on. Should we be talking about the Chinese government? Did you not see what's going on with the NBA right now?
Let me tell you something.
we allowed-
No, this is what's interesting to me is that the Chinese government is censoring a book about positive thinking.
That's right.
That's funny.
Yeah.
Okay,
Yeah.
What
did they
happened?
say?
They don't like any references to metaphysics, extra physicality. If you're talking about motivation, they're okay. If you're talking about placebo effect, very narrowly defined, they're okay. But if you start talking about this idea that the mind has some sort of extra physical qualities or mind over matter or anything to do with Neville, that's a huge turnoff to them because they don't want the average citizen to feel any loyalty to anything else out there other than the basic party structure, the government structure. So if somebody starts thinking, wow, I'm bigger than just flesh and bone. I'm bigger than just, this material being who lives and dies. I'm attached to something greater. They don't like that. The only thing you're attached to is that system. And so every reference I made in the book to anything that was extra physical got censored. It was the last thing I expected.
And in China,
Wow.
they don't have a religion, right?
No, they don't.
Well,
It's the
some
state.
people do, and they're persecuted. So.
Some people
the
do.
Muslims, what are they called? The
Uyghurs.
Yeah, the
Uyghurs
yeah.
are persecuted. Muslims are persecuted. One of the things I found, and this was sort of a shock to me, is that I was working with a translator, a young woman, lived in Shanghai, and her vernacular was totally Western. She could sit here at this table and have a conversation with all of us, talk about your favorite movies, etc. But whenever I would get onto a reference that had anything to do with spirituality or religion, she looked at me as blankly as could be. She had no idea what I was talking about.
Wow.
If I said, even if I just colloquially made a reference to like the soul or to higher energies or to a higher power, not even using the term God, she would be like, what are you talking about? We would have these Skype sessions where she'd be working on the translation of the book. She might have certain concepts and she'd say, when you talk about a higher power, what do you mean? And I would try to explain it in the most basic terms. And she would just look at me completely blankly.
Interesting.
Yeah, we could discuss anything else, music, food, movies, politics, but anything spiritual, and it was completely foreign. It was
Amazing.
strange.
Higher
But that's
power
better
maybe
than
means-
most girls in LA, just to be fair. They don't even talk about politics or any of that stuff, and let alone the
Get him,
higher power
Caitlin.
when
Get
you
him,
do it.
Caitlin.
Yeah.
Get him.
Well, we veered into a misogyny
Get
kind
'em.
of,
No,
joke,
Caitlin is
yeah.
definitely
Tara-
on the outliers. I'm just
Tehran's
saying.
talking about his dating life.
Yeah.
We're gonna do
his
Your
tarot
dating
cards
I
pool,
talk
next.
about that.
Tehran, your dating pool is not representative of.
You gotta
the
stop trying to
female,
trying to pick up women at
yeah.
your comedy shows.
Yeah, exactly.
Definitely don't do that.
Wait.
IG is my preferred means of transport.
Oh, DMs?
Let me ask you this.
Wow.
Let me ask you this. Going back to, because as we're starting to wrap it up, going back to where we started off for Halloween and the sort. So, if somebody says to you, "Hey, I practice witchcraft,"
Yeah.
or I don't know if people actually say I'm a Satanist.
They do say
So
that.
that person, the lesson here today from our listeners or viewers, don't be scared of that person. That's just a
Amen.
regular person
Amen.
who believes in certain things.
There's
Right.
a documentary right now about Satanism, I think, that I really want to
That's
see.
right.
That it's
Temple of Satan.
The Temple of Satan.
Where is that?
They,
On Netflix?
I don't know. Google it.
It
I
was
don't
in
know.
the theaters. It might
was
be
in
coming to
theaters,
Netflix.
but
now.
it's
Yeah.
kind of
It
about.
was released.
It's kind of like a comedy about Satanists.
What's it called
I
again?
want to see it. I don't know actually.
What's it called?
I just
I
threw
honestly
that
forget
out.
the name. But
Documentary
Threw that
about
out, couldn't back
Satanism.
it up.
The Temple of Satan, they're a group not to be confused with the Church of Satan, which was a group that was founded in 1966 by the great Anton LaVey, a man I admire very much. The Temple of Satan tends to be involved more with political activism, and they will erect statues of a horned god on public property and say, hey, you guys have your manger scenes.
Yes.
Why can't we have this?
Yeah.
And
That's a
they
real
will
thing.
put you face to face with these First Amendment questions. So they're into activism.
So what other things beyond is it all about First Amendment, or are they being activists for what other causes?
I think, it depends. Some of the people in that group will come to my events and they're super friendly and they're very turned on and they're into the occult. Other people within the Temple of Satan tend to be more on the activist side of things, and they want to do this as theater to sort of reaffirm First Amendment rights. The Church of Satan, which was founded by Anton LaVey, who's now deceased. Anton was a great magician, a real observer of human nature, a brilliant, shrewd, interesting artist, and I have great admiration for him.
So would you say, numbers wise, between Satanists and witches?
Well,
I
is
guess
there
witches.
pagans, Wiccans,
Druids, neo-pagans, yeah.
There's
How many
different
are
types
in
of
a
witches.
country of 300 million people? How
Yeah.
many? What's represented in that occult world?
I would say, and I really crunched the numbers in my book, Occult America, and I think this has held true for a long time. I would say probably a good 10% of the adult population will identify themselves very clearly as being part of some occult or mystical movement.
Wow.
Yeah.
30 million
That's
people.
30
A
million
lot of people.
Yeah.
A lot of people.
Here's the movie, by the way. The documentary is called Hail Satan. I can't believe
Oh
either
yeah,
one
Hail
of you
Satan
forget that.
question mark.
Question mark.
Yes,
Hail
got
Satan. And it's a battle for justice and equality. The Satanic
Right.
Temple is putting up a hell of a fight.
Yeah.
Full concept.
Well, this
I
has
have a
been.
question.
Go ahead. You got.
Oh,
Yeah,
sorry.
go for it.
The
Go.
last thing, because
Yeah,
it's
go ahead.
almost Halloween.
Yeah.
I was listening to one of your talks, and you were talking about how Halloween originated from like Celtic traditions.
Yeah.
Is that? Can you speak on that? Because that's my heritage, y'all.
Oh, sure. The
A little
ancient
bit.
Celts looked at this as a time of year to kind of gather the animals back into stalls and barns, clear the fields, celebrate the harvest, and honor the ancestors. And it was believed to be a time of year in which the veil between our physical world and the unseen world was at its thinnest. And this ancient belief was this is a time when you're closest to your deceased ancestors. So you burn lanterns, you have all-night vigils, you say prayers, you pay tribute to them. It was, in a certain sense, an ancestor worship holiday, and it became our modern form of Halloween. But traditionally speaking, it's still considered a time in which the veil is at its thinnest between the seen and the unseen worlds.
Is that what Dias
kind
de los Muertos, the Day of the Dead?
The day
It's the
after.
day after,
It's
right?
different roots, but it's related.
I just
It's
want to
related.
say that these people took it from the Persians. Here we have Rosh Hashanah. You're hitting the spoon against and warding off the evil spirits. Let's not. I feel like you've taken a
Well,
Took it from the Persians.
More importantly,
All right.
they had this tradition where it was like connect with your ancestors,
Right.
and then the American capitalism put Snickers and Milky Way
Yeah,
in the
and-
middle of
And
it.
more
Bars.
recently than you'd think, trick-or-treating really only became popular in this country after the Second World War. So trick-or-treating is fairly new, but people used to engage in some really freaky practices.
What did they
especially
used to
down
do?
south.
What did they used to do?
Oh.
Well, check this out. There was a folk practice down south called the Dumb Supper, And what it involved is usually a group of women, would set a supper table and they would do everything backwards. They'd set the table, walking around backwards, doing everything backwards. Then they'd sit on one side of the table. And at the stroke of midnight, the legend went that on the other side of the table, you would see the image of the man that you were going to marry. And if you didn't see the image of the man you were going to marry, you're going to die before marriage. And this was a folk practice that was very popular for decades down south.
Well, how did they have proof that the image of that guy was there? Like, what if you like?
Well, they'd say it was a vision. It was a vision. But
love
tell that
that.
to the Snickers company.
Yeah.
Wow.
So they brought the trick or treating in after World War II.
After World War II. It was an Irish custom. People would go door to door and get goodies from neighbors. It got picked up in America, and as soon as the candy companies got a hold of it, there was no looking back.
Well, as Tehran says, the Persians also used to do this
Thank
thing where
you.
we would go with a metal bowl and a spoon, and you go ding, 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 ding. This is around Persian New Year, and then they would give you nuts and raisins and dried fruits. So it's very much Halloween. So perhaps the Irish got it from.
Listen,
Iran.
these customs are universal. What I find is, and also look, not only in terms of customs, but the number 13 as a number of supposed bad luck. You'll find that in Vedic culture. You'll find that in Nordic culture. You'll find that among the ancient Hebrews.
Parallel thought. I'm just saying.
really
Persians
travels.
too.
It has a
We have that. The
Yes.
13th day of our holiday,
course.
of our New Year, we leave the 13th day of our New Year. We're supposed to leave the house and go to a park and picnic because it's supposed to be, get out for the bad luck is at home.
And you
go
get
out.
rid of the bad luck.
Fascinating.
That's 5,000 years old. I'm just saying.
Yeah, and
remarkable.
we call it Sizda Bedar, which means Sizda is 13, Bedar means at the door. So like 13th
Get rid
day.
of the 13th.
Yeah.
That's fascinating.
You rid yourself of the 13th.
Isn't that
That's
crazy?
really what you do. In
And,
order for the evil spirits not to find where you are.
Now dig this. Next time you're in a hotel or a casino, take a look at the elevator bank. Chances are you won't see
No
a 13th
13th
Yeah.
floors.
Yeah,
Yeah.
we still practice this.
Wow.
Yeah.
Why don't we
cool.
still practice Lupercalia? Can we talk about that? No. Okay.
What's
is
Lupercalia?
that?
Ooh, you got to
don't
read
know.
the book. You got to read a book.
Okay. All
It's
right.
just like no podcast I've ever done.
Yeah.
You guys are
Wow.
interesting.
Yeah.
Wow.
What's Lupercalia?
We're all over
It's
the map.
this like tradition. It's like I'm not the historian.
What is it? What's Lupercalia?
I've never heard of
You've
this
never heard
before.
of
I was hoping you
Lupercalia?
would explain
Lupercalia
this.
is
What is
is this Wiccan sex tradition where the women chase down and find the men. And it's a whole thing, and it has to do with the transmutation within the life form.
The first
Lupercalia.
Sadie
Yeah.
Hawkins dance.
Oh,
in
Sadie
a
Hawkins.
way, I like that.
I was Little Abner. I was Little Abner in Little Abner where we did the Sadie Hawkins dance.
Oh, wow.
Listen, we've gone full circle here.
Yeah, really.
Listen, how do people find you, Mitch? On Twitter, on Instagram? What is it?
I'm on Twitter at Mitch Horowitz. If you throw my name, Mitch Horowitz, into Google, it'll take you to my website and all kinds of videos, lectures,
You have
articles.
Instagram?
I'm easy to find. Not yet.
I
Not
need
yet.
you on Instagram.
I'm working too hard,
Well,
but
listen,
I'll get on there.
You're a very interesting person, great speaker. You're a great teacher. You even gave Caitlin some hope
Thank
for
you.
her very
Finally.
near future.
Finally, some hope.
Take a picture of it.
Okay.
Yeah.
Mitch Horowitz, thank you for being with us. Thank
Pleasure.
you for joining us on Back to School with Maz Jobrani.
Back to school. Yeah.
Thank you for listening to another episode of Back to School with Maz Jobrani. We hope you're enjoying it. We hope you're having fun. And we hope you're learning something. So make sure to let your friends know. Share it on iTunes. Share the clips from YouTube. Just get it out there. However you're listening, let your friends know to tune in to Back to School with Maz Jobrani.
Back to school.